So today, as I mentioned, Kristen is not able to join us. But the topic of today is like, let's really talk about a hot topic. And I actually love this topic because not only is it a hot topic in terms of just like what's going on today, but it's also a great topic in terms of business. So it's a cool crossover between business and hot topics. And the hot topic right now that I'd love to chat about in terms of how does DEI actually work? As you can imagine, as a 25-year plus HR and recruiting professional and somebody who's worked across countless types of organizations, anywhere from mostly in the private sector, certainly, but also with government contractors, also with public in terms of like public health and healthcare organizations, not-for-profits, education organizations, and having worked across so many different organizations, it gives me an ick, to be honest with you, when I hear people speak such a, I'm just going to use the word, ignorant way about a topic like DEI, that I think they're just kind of like picking up on buzzwords. And I will say this, like, I think people do this in a lot of different topics. I'm not saying like this is a specific, like, politically motivated thing, but I will say that in general, it's a tough thing. I think when somebody has a professional background in a certain area or on a certain topic, to hear a topic discussed by the larger public in a way as if they really think they know what they're talking about just by picking up buzzwords, just by picking up statements that other people are making. And so, yeah, it's been icky. I'll just tell you that. It's been an icky thing to listen to people talk about the subject of DEI in a way that they just really, quite frankly, don't really know anything about. So I'm going to look at this as an educational opportunity. I hope that people will keep their minds and their ears and their eyes open to learning, and to not just, give in to, everybody, whenever they're talking about the other side, they're so quick to bring up like what the media is or isn't doing. But at the end of the day, we all are individuals who have the ability to control what we listen to. We have the ability to control what we pay attention to, what we follow, what we educate ourselves on. No one is forcing us to do that unless you're like being held prisoner somewhere. But hopefully that's not the case for anybody. And the reality is that you always have the choice to learn. You have the choice to stay open. You have the choice to, in terms of where you're getting your information from. You have a choice to believe the information being told to you. So I just really am taking just a straight educational approach to the topic of DEI as a 25-year professional in the human resources and recruiting and hiring fields. And I hope that it's something that will maybe carry some weight for you as a result of that. So I always like to start off with, whenever we have one of these business educational topics, is to just kind of get to some nitty gritty, which is a definition. So let's first start, and I've got it over here. It was on my phone, but I moved it over here because obviously I can't access it. But I'm going to start with what the overall overview and definition of DEI is. So first and foremost is DEI hiring practices are strategies that aim to create a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce and workspace. So I guess like the first question I would encourage you to ask yourself is that something you agree with? Do you agree that it is a positive thing to have a workforce that is diverse, that is equitable and inclusive? So that's the first thing I would ask you to do. How do DEI hiring practices work? So there's a list here actually, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with all these, so I'm going to have to kind of walk through it with you. One is setting goals, meaning setting targets for representation in your recruitment strategy. So I will give you a little bit of background on this. I have personally and professionally worked with countless organizations in all different types of industries when it comes to DEI and when it comes specifically to diversity recruitment. And I want to put a huge misconception to rest. By having a commitment as an organization to have a diverse workforce and to have diversity in your recruiting strategies, by no stretch of imagination does there mean there is any sacrifice of hiring qualified people. As a matter of fact, my professional experience over 25 years has been the exact opposite. I will tell you that qualifications, the demands of those qualifications, the standard and the bar is higher when it comes to a specific diversity recruiting strategy and the goal of hiring and having a diverse workforce. When there are specific roles or positions that are identified where we say, hey, the target here is to identify a diverse person, and, to be in this role, again, there is absolutely no sacrifice whatsoever of qualifications. And so I think that that's a big misconception. It's something that's been put out there. And I'm actually going to address that more by making sure that there's an understanding of the difference between DEI and affirmative action, because these are two completely different things. So we're going to address that. The next thing on the list that's here, in terms of my research, how DEI hiring practices work, write inclusive job descriptions using language that welcomes a diverse group of people. So this could be boiling down to something as simple as we're an equal opportunity employer. And again, listing at the end of the day, outside of that, everything's the same. When it comes to what the job is, in terms of what the requirements are for the role, what the skills are required, the education that's required, the experience that's required, all of that's the same. So I think the inclusivity part of it is more about going, we're an equal opportunity employer. And then search broadly, look for candidates from a variety of backgrounds and experiences. Oh my gosh, I can't tell you how much I preached about this. This is across the board. Even when I wasn't specifically working in diversity recruiting, it was a message I would always share with the hiring managers and with the leadership in an organization to say, if you have a team of people, let's use a metaphor in terms of like two athletics team, right? So if you have an athletic team, let's say a baseball team, do you want every single person on that team to have the same strength? Do you want every person to be exactly like the next person, meaning they're all great, offensively in terms of batting, but they're terrible at fielding? Or everybody on the team's a great pitcher? Or everybody on the team is great at throwing and catching? Or do you want a variety of people on that team? And in particular, when you come up against another team that you have a challenge or a problem, do you want everybody's thought processes and the way they approach a problem to be the same? Or do you want people who come from a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences that can then lend themselves to working through and troubleshooting through that problem? And I think a lot of times, I can't tell you how many times in the 25 years I've worked, especially with leadership, who have said something to the effect of, I would love to hire 5 more people just like me. And I would say, interesting. I'm not saying that you aren't great and do a little bit of ego stroking when it comes to that. But if there's a problem that you can't solve, how is 5 more of you going to help you solve that problem? And typically 9 times out of 10, that message would register, and they would realize, over time, the benefit of having, a variety of backgrounds, experiences, knowledge, coming into the role. Again, not sacrificing qualifications, to be clear. It just is to say that having, a diverse background and diverse experiences are something that lends itself to actually a better team. It lends itself to being able to solve problems more effectively and more efficiently. The next thing on the list is interview inclusivity. So this is the word, interview inclusivity, and is asking questions that help you understand a candidate's values and experiences, right? So you're inviting in, you're asking questions, you're being a good listener, you're finding out like, what is it that does that person bring to the table? How are their unique experiences going to lend itself to something positive in the role and into the team and into the environment? Design the application process, make sure the application process is inclusive and fair. So when I would work, again, whether this isn't just in diversity recruitment, this is across the board, is that you're creating an application experience and process that isn't going to be intentionally excluding anyone. And I will tell you, in today's day and age, in particular, is with a younger generations who are super tech savvy. It's just innate to them because they've grown up with it their entire life. The tedious nature of like old school applications is going to be a massive turnoff. For, people who are, it's the opposite as well. People who might be older and not as tech savvy, if they have to go through, let's say, an exclusively AI driven application process, or they have to do a video interview or things of that nature, is it going to, at that application stage of the process, going to deter certain populations of people from applying? And those are just 2 examples, but there's plenty of others too. So that's definitely something that, in terms of, any best practices for hiring, we make sure is happening across the board. And allow for reasonable adjustments. So make accommodations for candidates with disabilities, guys. And I think that this is, again, people hear these buzzwords, DEI, they make a lot of assumptions. They're not really well informed. They're certainly not, people who've been working in human resources and recruiting for 25 years. And they make assumptions about what it means because of the buzzwords and because of other very uninformed people sharing information with them. And there's this assumption about, somehow sacrifice of qualifications, somehow sacrifice of experience or skill set is going to be made in order to accommodate a diverse workforce. And couldn't be further from the truth. And this is inclusive of part of your diverse workforce are people with disabilities. So just to run through this, if you're a woman, you're considered to be a part of DEI. So let's start there. And if you're a person of color, you're considered to be a part of DEI. If you're a veteran, you're considered to be a part of DEI. If you're a disabled person who's still capable of performing the job in which you're applying for and qualified to do, you're a part of DEI. And if you think about yourself, or if you think about the people that you love and you care about that surround you, would you like those individuals to be included as a part of a diverse workforce or not? If you're not interested in that, I think there's some deeper soul searching probably people need to do. But I think we can all agree that all the folks that I just mentioned should certainly, if qualified, if they meet the requirements for the role, and certainly if they exceed them, should be of equal consideration to any other person. And and all of those other things really don't matter. And that's what DEI is actually about. It's about making sure that everyone who is qualified for the job is actually being considered for the job. And I think there's some parts of this that a lot of people probably aren't aware of, which I'm going to get to here in a moment. But I'm going to get to other parts. So here are some, there's a list here of benefits, but again, I'm not going to kind of go through in detail. What I would like to do at this point is I'm actually going to switch over to, I think, clearing up some confusion. I think that there's a lot of people, again, misinformed, miseducated, that are just listening to buzzwords and then getting out there and trying to use the buzzword as if they know better, that there's a very big confusion between DEI and affirmative action. So these are two very different things, guys, and their purposes, as I just described through DEI, this is all about making sure that, working towards a diverse workforce of qualified people, right? Nothing is being sacrificed in terms of qualifications. However, affirmative action was a completely different program. And just to give you, again, let's go to definitions. Affirmative action is a set of policies that aim to address discrimination and create equal opportunities for underrepresented groups. It can apply to education, employment, and other areas. How does it work? It identifies discrimination. So basically, for many years, like early in my career, I was responsible because of HR and recruiting to do affirmative action reporting. And the companies who were responsible for affirmative action were any companies that had any sort of, if they were a government contractor of any kind, if they were in the public sector in any way, shape, or form, that they actually had to create a report every year. And I was responsible for making sure that report was created, which can't imagine how tedious it was before applicant tracking systems that basically created an automated database for us. But you would have to, of course, collect that data, right? And all of you have probably seen this in a whole bunch of different environments that they'll ask about things of your background in terms of race, gender, age, are you a veteran? So these are questions that you're being asked. And then that's, of course, considered confidential information that is not disclosed to the hiring managers as a part of the process, but it is recorded in a report. And then that report had to be turned in every single year into the federal government. And that was the affirmative action reporting that was as a result of affirmative action during the time that it was in place. And in addition to, and that report was used if there was discriminatory hiring practices, it was used to prevent discrimination. It was used to remedy past discrimination issues. And it was also, of course, used to promote diversity. But again, you have to just kind of keep in mind of like, what was the timing and the intention behind affirmative action, and recognize, again, as an educated person, that affirmative action and DEI are not the same thing. Yes, they I think ultimately want to promote diversity, but the ways in which that happen are two completely different things. And again, being informed, being educated, and not just giving in to the buzzwords and not just giving in to being influenced, but actually, making sure that you're like, hey, I care about being a well-informed person. And, I think that that's something that in general in life, right? Like we would want to go to people who actually have backgrounds and knowledge and experience in those things. We don't want to just, go opinions shouldn't carry more weight than facts. And, especially when it comes to something that is, specific to business or something that's like a hard tech skill. You want to really focus on the facts versus opinion. So, again, hopefully that helps just distinguish for you to be more educated on the differences between DEI and affirmative action, two completely different things and two things that have two very different purposes. And let me get to the next one here. One of the things I thought was interesting was from a legal perspective, when you talk about affirmative action versus equal opportunity. Affirmative action is proactive, while equal opportunity is reactive. I thought that was like a super good call out to understand the difference between the two. Affirmative action aims to address discrimination before it happens, and it certainly has legal remedies in place for an employer who has discriminatory hiring practices. There in the legal history, there's some key court cases like Regents of the University of California versus Bakke and Gruder. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Versus Bollinger have shaped the legal history of affirmative action. So, if you want to look into that more and research affirmative action, so you're in a better position to distinguish between how different and how these are two very separate things between DEI and affirmative action, I definitely encourage you to get out there and educate yourself more. So one of the big questions is affirmative action even in practice today? Is it a part of our legal system? Is it the same program that it used to be? And the answer is no. So just so you're aware, no, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against affirmative action in college admissions in June of 2023. And since then, that's where it started. Also, California banned race-based affirmative action in 1996, guys. So, a system that was put into place several decades ago in order to get past a time right after, finally after desegregation during the civil rights movement, was to create opportunities just to crack the window open for people, again, who are qualified for a position to even be considered or looked at. That was the purpose behind affirmative action. Affirmative action isn't even in place today. So I think that's also creates some confusion for people because they're like, they think that DEI is somehow affirmative action, first and foremost. And second of all, they think that affirmative action is still in place, and it's not. So hopefully that information is helpful to you. So now that we're past through talking through the initial definitions, talking through a little history, talking through what is DEI actually, helping, hopefully to be a little bit more educated on what DEI is. I definitely want to share, in my 25 years, working with diversity recruiting and diversity recruitment, and what were some of the things that I experienced and I saw. And I'm going to do my best because I want to be respectful of, great companies and people that I've worked with. And I think that, ultimately, yes, were there situations where there were blatant discrimination problems happening? Yes. And I'm going to share some of those. And then I think there was also, there was situations of kind of blissful ignorance and just, not knowing better, not really seeing better. And so I'm going to give a couple stories about that. First one, I'm going to bring you back way into early years of my career. This was even before I knew what I was doing professionally was recruiting. And I had just gotten started in human resources and recruiting super duper early in my career. And I worked with some leadership that did some really questionable things. And, I kind of in a weird way, I'm actually thankful for this experience because sometimes I think you need contrast, you need some extreme contrast in your life and especially in your professional career to go wow, that was bad. That was really bad. That is not something I condone. That is not something I support. It is not something now as a business owner that I would ever even remotely agree to. But unfortunately, it's something really early. I think I was 21 when I started working with them. and, just saw some really, really disturbing things happen at an abusive level, and, and on a lot of different levels. But I'm going to share one particular story. So, just had gotten started in recruiting, and every single month, one of the leaders would come back and get the recruiting team together, and they would say things like, this month, we're going to go after a particular population. And when you talk about discriminatory practices, he was very specific. He was so specific that when I interviewed and he shook my hand, I happened to be the flavor of the month in terms of what he was looking for. He shook my hand and said, oh, you're a Filipino Baltimore girl, you're hired. And that's literally the extent of the, 15 seconds of interaction that I had with him. Because I just so happened to fall in the category of him looking for Filipino Baltimore people that month. And every month thereafter in recruiting, he would come to our team and he would say, try to make light of a situation. He said, this month I want to hire a half Jewish, half Black, guys in their mid-20s. Or actually guys in their early 30s. And I looked at him, I kind of twerked my head a little bit and I go, so you want us to hire Lenny Kravitz? And there would just be crazy conversations like this month after month, just like a very targeted like population of people. We had 6 months where we were recruiting Mormons. Like it was something. And again, being, I think, unfortunately, really naive, as I think the majority of the workforce was there, because part of the cult target strategy that they had in this environment was to, target like kind of young, naive people that didn't really know any better. But fortunately for me, I think I kind of did my best to navigate and hold on to as much of my soul as possible during that time. And I just continued to focus on like, okay, whatever. I'm not really paying attention to these weird demands that you're making. I'm just going to continue to focus on who possesses the right skills, who are the people who are qualified for this role and will, as a result of their education and their experience, will be successful in this position. Well, lo and behold, I had several months where I was recruiter of the month, and I had the highest number of people hired into training. I had the highest number of people successful coming out of training. And all of a sudden I get pulled in to the office and he sits me down. He looks at me dead in the eyes and he says, I don't want you hiring any more Black women that are single mothers. And I was like, what? And he said, we're done. We're done hiring single Black mothers. And I said, I don't understand how that's relevant to people who are successful in the role. He's like, it's too much of a distraction to the sales floor. And I said, well, I don't agree with you. If these, whoever I brought on, if they've been top producers and they've been successful in the role, I don't agree that matters. Well, you better do what I'm saying. And I said, and I just I didn't acknowledge it. I didn't agree. I didn't disagree. I just left the conversation at that point. And then I proceeded to make sure that I had future Black single mothers that I had come in. If anybody here knows me, I definitely have that rebellious spirit. Tell me, try to force me to do something, you're probably not going to get the result that you're looking for. But that was just an example of like if people are in denial about what is happening in today's workforce and work world, it's happening, guys. And it's happening in all kinds of different ways. It might not even be in like the traditional sense that you're like, the big focus and big talk is around DEI is this concept of like almost like wanting to convince society that DEI is bad because it's anti-white men. And I couldn't disagree with that more. And I'll give you an example of that as well. And again, I think I would put this next example and this next story into the category, and I apologize, I do need to make sure I'm paying attention to my time. I'm gonna put this next story into the category of like just kind of blissful ignorance and like not knowing any better. So I worked with a company, been around for a really long time. And I will tell you hands down, this is probably one of the most ethical companies I worked for in my 12 years in corporate. And just good people, honest people, hardworking people, cared about their workforce. Like I didn't, and this was later on, in that 12 years, it wasn't at the beginning and kind of seeing it naively, not knowing any better. And they had an executive committee. And this was a global executive committee. And I had the honor of actually working with all of them because I was responsible for leading programs, and it came to career development programs for the company. So I spent quite a bit of time, with them throughout the course of the year. And at one point in time, the need for diversity on this executive team became a little too obvious. And what I mean by that is, on this committee of 12 executives, I think in total it was actually 15, out of this global committee, global, mind you, I hope you hear those words loud and clear. There was one man who had a Hispanic background. Everybody else were middle-aged and older white men. And I think it was so obvious to them that they were kind of like, we could probably do better than this, right? So they had a couple openings that popped up on the executive committee. And certainly people at the next level down from the executives, there was plenty of opportunity from a diversity perspective in the organization to choose from. And so we did a combination of external executive recruitment, and then we also, of course, looked inward, and the preference was to certainly have somebody internal that would be considered first, because this was a huge opportunity. And the outcome of this search was they decided to have a woman join the executive committee. And on one hand, I go, this is really kind of sweet and naive. They literally high-fived each other with the decision, and they were like, yeah, we're doing it. We're killing it over here with diversity. And I kind of, now I think in retrospect, I look back at this and I go, wow, I mean, this was 2009. And it's almost like on one hand, you go, okay, I'm glad that they cared enough, to pay attention and try. But I also sit there and go wow, is it this sense of, hey, we've done something meaningful here by choosing a highly, highly, highly qualified woman to join a team of, that has historically always been men, and let alone any person of color. For the first time in over 100 years, it's also kind of gosh, have we come as far as we would like to believe we've come? And I can tell you since then, it really hasn't changed a whole lot. The same challenges to a great degree at that executive level across the entire organization, and many, 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 many long-term organizations, is still reflecting the same. Now, newer startup companies, especially in the tech industry, I think have been much more successful at a starting point of having qualified diversity in their environment, but and they also commit to it, and they will really they will put the work in to making sure that they have the diverse workforce through extensive searches of qualified people. I just can't emphasize that enough, because I think for me, if there's nothing else that you guys take away from this conversation, is there is zero sacrifices of qualifications and skills and experience in education when it comes to DEI hiring practices. I promise you that, as a 25-year professional and as somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. Not just a buzzword, not just an assumption. Again, I'm not speaking about affirmative action. Affirmative action and DEI are not the same topic. I can't emphasize that enough either. But I hope that today you guys maybe took something away. I hope I was able to share something. I hope there's some value that comes from, having the background that I have. And I hope that this is something that all of us can continue to do. Share facts, share knowledge based on real experience, not to perpetuate buzzwords, not to impersonate as if we're a professional and have knowledge in something, and then use that to try to leverage an agenda or try to leverage, your opinion, but to actually just stay focused on, the facts and getting information from valuable resources that actually know what they're talking about. Forward to seeing you next time. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.